One of the things that cannot be said about a church like ours that utilizes the so-called lectionary, a list of readings that are assigned to us preachers, is that we hide from you the tough stuff. The tough stuff of life and the tough stuff of the Bible. Sometimes I wish we would. As a preacher, I would really not like to have to get the story about the beheading of John the Baptist. My job would be easier if I didn't have to tell that story nor think about it. But the lectionary will not let us be easy. It will not let us be easy on us as preachers, easy on listeners, easy on politicians, easy on our society. It won't let us be easy. Now, I have to say to you that sometimes I do wish we could do preaching in a different way. And if somebody died and put me in charge, I probably would redesign buildings so that we weren't like this, so that we were closer together, and so that maybe I could split you up during a sermon and ask you to converse about what we are talking about, so that the messenger, the preacher, is not the only one who has to relay the tough stuff. Perhaps you would be the one relaying the tough stuff. Amos, one of the harshest prophets in all of the Bible, brings us the first tough stuff in our reading for today. Now, he is a guy from the South who is addressing people in the North. And you know that there's a recipe for disaster. Few of us like it when some outsider comes and criticizes us. Americans do not hear well critique when it comes from other people. I don't know, the Canadians or the French or the Swedes. They got no right talking to us like that. Well, Amos, the Southerner, is speaking to the folks in the North. And he is telling them that in the North, they are not living straight lives. He says that what God has shown him in a vision is a wall built, as Paula pointed out, with a plumb line. And the plumb line is in the midst of God's people, Israel. And the plumb line is going to help God see where God's people are. And Amos tells us God is now going to avoid his people. He will never pass them by again. He passed over them in the Exodus, but now he is going to forget about them. He's going to leave them behind. Whoa! God is really ticked off today. So ticked off that he's going to make sure that the high places of Israel, are called their sanctuaries, are laid to waste, that is destroyed. And what's more, we are told, and again, I'm just the messenger here, all right? He's coming after the king of Israel with a sword, Jeroboam. In other words, he's going to kill him. I said to you, we're not hiding the tough stuff from you today. Amos is not hiding the tough stuff from the leadership of Israel, the northern kingdom. And the leadership of the northern kingdom is feeling rightfully deeply threatened. The high priest at the sanctuary at Bethel, a guy named Amaziah, tells on Amos. He sends a note to the king, King Jeroboam, saying, you know what? Amos is conspiring against you in the very center of the house of Israel. He is working to undo your kingship at the place where you go to church. He's saying that you are going to die and that Israel is going off into exile. So Amaziah speaks to Amos and he says boldly, get the heck out of town. Take your words back to the south where they belong. Earn your money there. Don't go earn your money up here. Leave us alone. You, by the way, are in the king's sanctuary. The church, you see, belongs to the government. Whoa, really? This isn't a sanctuary for Yahweh, huh? No, this is the sanctuary for the king. This is the king's sanctuary. Oh, by the way, in case you don't know this, this kind of stuff happens throughout history all the time. people in powerful positions use religion to prop up their power. Religion becomes a tool of the powerful, resulting in powerful people seeking their own prophets, their own spokespeople, who will speak words that represent what they themselves want to hear. They were called in biblical days court prophets. Amos wasn't going to be a court prophet. In fact, when Amaziah tells Amos to get the heck out of town, Amos responds by saying, "Well, I'm no prophet after all." That is to say, I think this is part of what he's saying, he is no court prophet. He's not the prophet who's going to speak what the king wants to hear. And then maybe he's also saying, I think he's saying this as well, he's actually no prophet at all. He's just an ordinary guy, a trimmer of sycamore trees and a shepherd of the sheep. And the only reason that he is speaking the hard words that he is speaking today is because God is making him do it. Now, many people get nervous when religion and politics are mixed. And frankly, I do too, when that mixing involves partisan politics, when religion and political parties become joined at the hips. When that happens, lots of bad stuff happens. Religion, and this is my big concern, is co-opted then by politics. God is seen as being on my side, supporting my agenda, and Amos will not have any of that. Religion and politics are not separate things for him, but the God he represents is bigger than any agenda, any government, any party. And the message that he is called to proclaim, he speaks reluctantly. For it is truth spoken to power. And the powerful don't want to hear the words. But the prophet must speak them because the heart of God longs for justice and longs for truth. And sometimes what the powerful are up to is not justice or truth. Now, if I could have my own way here, I would get you in small groups and I would ask you to talk about this. In what ways is the church called to speak truth to power, to address the issues of political importance? In what ways is this a difficult task? And how do you know whether you are really speaking God's truth to power or just telling everybody your opinion? After all, as Richard Rohr says, and he is so much on the money right here, opinion is the lowest level of knowledge. And then I would like to ask, maybe you could talk in a small group, how many of us really want to hear the hard word? Do you want the prophetic truth spoken to you, whether you are in a position of power or not? Or do you just want folks who will tell you what you want to hear? Do you allow yourself to have friends or spouses, perhaps, who speak the hard word to you, who call you to a higher place, who say you're not acting as you should and you could be different and you're messing with a lot of people's lives? Do you want people who will tell the truth? Amos is not content with the easy word. A church shaped by the prophets like Amos, and frankly, like the prophet John the Baptist, will not let those in power, and honestly, you and me, off the hook easily. I was going to try to avoid this John the Baptist story, but I can't. This John the Baptist story is a wild story, the kind that you probably don't want new people to experience on their first day at church with you. So if you're new the first day, forgive me. Come back in a couple weeks. We won't have stories like this. But I got to tell you the truth. The truth comes to us through this awful story about John the Baptist. And the ELCA's Facebook pastors page this past week, I noted a pastor who said, I think this story out of Mark is so awful that we ought to avoid it because he wanted to protect kids from having to hear it. Well, maybe we shouldn't read it. I know I'm always picking on poor Joel Osteen, but I can't really see happy Joel Osteen preaching on the beheading of John the Baptist with the smile that he always preaches with, And let me encourage you to think about picking hymns or praise songs on the day when we read about the beheading of John the Baptist. I dare you, Google that. Hymns and the beheading of John the Baptist. Try selecting one for that. Google will not give you much. The church won't let us not go to the hard places. And again, this is a hard place that comes when truth is spoken to power. John spoke truth to power. To the tetrarch Herod. Mark got it wrong in calling him a king. John speaks a word of critique. It's hard to say what the critique is actually about, but it has something to do with the affair that Herod Antipas had with his sister-in-law. John is criticizing the power-mongering behavior of the man in charge. Now, you and I often see affairs as sexual improprieties, and frankly, they can be that. But they often also are great misuses of power by the powerful. Well, John's critique of Herod got him in trouble with Herodias, the one Herod had an affair with and eventually married. Isn't it interesting how the powerful in these stories are often depicted? Even their wives are named after them. Herod and Herodias, and they have a child named Herodias. Can you say narcissism? Herodias, this new wife of Herod, has a prejudice against John. And when another Herodias, somebody's daughter, performs a dance, and I'll let you fill in the blanks in there, a drunk Herod is phenomenally pleased. This is remarkably creepy. And the very drunk Herod tells the dancing Herodias that she can have whatever she wants from him now. And she then runs off to Mama Herodias to receive her advice as to what she should ask for. And what does she ask for? John the Baptist head on a platter. Violence is what we often get too often from people who will do all that they can to maintain power. It is a sad indictment on the human condition. Now, I got to ask. I'm a Lutheran preacher, all right? And we Lutheran preachers are into proclaiming good news. So I got to ask, where's the good news in all of this? In case you don't know, this story comes in the midst of the story about Jesus sending his disciples off into their mission. Oh, that's great. So we're going to get our heads chopped off. I mean, is that what this is about? Doesn't seem like there's much good news here. Maybe if I broke you up in a small group, you'd be able to figure out some of this good news. It just seems to be evading me. Roger, maybe you can figure it. I can't. I am not going to answer the question too quickly, where's the good news, or too resolutely, because sometimes I think we just have to sit with the hard stuff. Sometimes the good news doesn't make a lot of sense until we see what we're up against, until the truth is told. And sometimes the truth, even the truth that we must hear addressed to ourselves, isn't pretty. Sometimes power is badly misused. And by the way, that will be the truth as it is applied to the life of Jesus. Note these words in Mark's story. When John's disciples heard about what happened to John, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Didn't something similar occur to Jesus? But in Mark's story, his closest disciples didn't take his body. They all abandoned him. In some ways, what happened to Jesus was worse than what happened to John. Sometimes we simply have to face the bad stuff. What happened in Gaza yesterday and what happened in Pennsylvania. Sometimes we got to face the bad stuff. We can't run from it. And I'm not going to impose any good news on all of this. Although I would say this, it is worth your while to come back next week. You'll get another aspect of our message next week. Next week, we're going to have a different kind of party than the one that is thrown by Herod. Next week, the focus won't be on the powerful and their misdeeds. Next week, the focus will be on an alternative to violence. Next week, we'll get a big party for 5,000 people, of ordinary people, not power mongers. Next week, the rich won't be feeding off the poor. Next week, everyone will get fed, and there will be leftovers for people not yet at the party. Next week, abundance is going to rule, but I am not going to talk about what's going to happen next week. You need to come back. Next week, it will be about the reign, not of Herod and power-mongering people, but the reign of Jesus. Until next week, though, I will let you sit with Amos and John the Baptist. You know, sometimes life isn't easy, and neither is the Bible. Amen.